So you saw a few of the logos. So the NACP is what I'm involved with at NAU, and that's the Native American Cancer Prevention Partnership, and also the Southwest Health Equity Research Collaborative, which actually supported some of this partnership between Missouri Breaks. And so today I'm going to talk about HPV and sort of the ongoing research that we have at NAU. You can reach out to me by email, phone. We do have a lab Twitter account. I'm more active on that. We also have Instagram for the younger generation. That's more monitored by my lab members. And we also have a lab website if you want to learn about the other students in my lab or projects and opportunities that are available for research or students. And so before I get started, not only acknowledging all of you and where you're from, but being in this virtual environment, I want to acknowledge NAU and the homelands of the Native Americans from this region, because as Rayanne said, I'm from Western New York and I'm here in Flagstaff, Arizona. And so again, just honoring the past, present, and future generations. And NAU actually sits at the San Francisco Peaks, which are those seen in the background. So today we have a little bit of snow on those peaks, but the sky is blue. And so again, my research focuses on really just improving Native American health. And I do this not only through vaccine design, but also mentoring in STEM education, the public health work, which has been more of what I've been doing with Missouri Breaks. And really the goal, like I said, is to improve Native health. And what does this really look like? And so down here is a logo for our high school program. I think I provided a couple of lectures last school year to schools in South Dakota. And then when we're talking about more of the biomedical, that's really my students in the lab and working on the vaccine designs as well. And these are just examples of things that we do in our lab. But more on the public health side, right, that's working with community members. And a lot of this really comes from a prayer that I saw from the Lakota people. And I really feel like that is the motivation and the driving force behind my research. And that's do this so that the people may live. And so I really thank all of you for providing that to me. And it's a motivation and driving my research forward. And so today, I'm going to focus more on the public health. I do have some slides on the vaccine design, but again, it's really can be driven time and what the interest of the group is and what they would like to see. And so I'll start more on the public health side. But before I get into that, these are some questions that we asked to audiences that were scientific members or STEM professionals and students. And we published this back in 2019, and just asking questions to these community members and also these STEM professionals or healthcare professionals. And I'm not going to go through every single one, but I want you to just look at them and see, do you know the answer? Is this true or false, right? Is HPV the most common STI? Are there more than 150 types? Are all warts on the body caused by HPV? HPV can cause cancer in men. And some HPV infections can be effectively treated with medications. And then more on the vaccine, the HPV vaccine, right? The HPV protects against 9 types that can cause cancer. And there's a 0 chance of contracting HPV from the HPV vaccine. And so I say top secret, but the answers really is what I'm going to walk you through on some of these. More of the ones highlighted in red, because that's the ones we're finding individuals, even now when we go to our different healthcare providers or present to community members, the ones in red are typically the ones that individuals are getting wrong. And like I said, we had 67% of our respondents had a master's degree or higher, and they're still getting these questions wrong. And again, it's not common knowledge, but I think as healthcare professionals, it's important that we continue to provide this education to individuals because they're the ones really reaching out to community members. All right, so 1 and 2 are true. right? And so HPV is the most common STI. A lot of it has to do with the types. There's over 150 types. However, there's only about 40 that are spread through sexual contact. And as a result of that, almost everyone gets exposed to HPV at some point in their life. But there are no treatments out there, right? There are no antivirals that can treat HPV. You're really only treating the health outcome. So if you have warts, you're treating the warts that are a result of HPV. You're not treating the actual infection. And the same can be said about cervical cancer or other HPV-associated cancers. And so all warts on the body are caused by HPV. That is actually true. So these pictures are examples of more rare cases, but these are all warts. These are individuals who have a genetic factor that is causing them essentially to overexpress the virus. And the warts really can be seen as, excessive, not like a general common small wart, whether it's a wart on the hands or somewhere else, or a genital wart, right? They're all caused by different types of HPV. And this is showing a family, that gene being passed down through 4 generations. And so again, all warts on the body are caused by HPV. So again, that's a little misconception that some people have. All right, getting more into the vaccine themselves. So the chance of contracting HPV from the HPV vaccine is 0, right? That statement is true. You cannot get HPV from the vaccine itself. And really it's because of what these vaccines are made out of. And so the HPV vaccines come from what are called virus-like particles. So they look like a virus, but they're not really a virus, but they make your body think that you have a virus that you've been infected with. And so it creates antibody response. And the whole reason this is useful is because these virus-like particles, they take these small monomers or proteins, right? And they spontaneously self-assemble into what looks like a virus. And so when you try to vaccinate with just a small monomer, the small piece of this vaccine, you really don't create antibodies. It's this larger molecule, this virus-like particle. Once you vaccinate individuals against HPV, they're then able to create antibodies and be protected against HPV. And so that's kind of going back to, there are treatments, right? These vaccines that we have currently available, and I'll show on the next slide a little bit more about the vaccines. These are called prophylactic, or they prevent, right, infections. They are not they cannot treat infections, so they're not therapeutic, right? And so when we talk with community members, it's really about immunizing their adolescents at a young age, prior to exposure, right? You want to prevent them from getting infected because these cannot treat infection. And so I think that has helped with some hesitancy among parents as to why we're vaccinating individuals at such a young age against these HPV types. And so there has been 3 vaccines that have been developed, 2 available in the US. So that's Gardasil 4 and Gardasil 9. Cervarix was not actually available in the US. And so what we see now with Gardasil 9, that's the one that is available and still given to individuals, is it protects against 2 types that can cause genital warts, right? So that statement about HPV vaccines protects against 9 types that can cause cancer, that is false, because within that vaccine, 2 can prevent against genital warts, and that's number 6 and number 11. And then the other 7 types are indicated in the underlined. And again, this is a cocktail, right? So when you're vaccinated, you essentially have all these different virus-like particles in a single cocktail, and you are then exposed to all of these different virus-like particles. And so the CDC guidelines have changed over the last couple of years. Now, individuals between the age of 9 and 26 still should receive 2 doses, but what they're saying is individuals between 26 and 45, they can still receive the vaccine, and they should reach out to their health care providers to see if this is something that would be beneficial to them. And it's estimated that 90% of genital warts and 90% of cervical cancer cases you'll be protected against with the current Gardasil 9. And so that data comes from the general population, and which I'm going to show is how that might not necessarily be true among Native populations because of the types of HPV that we have found in our communities in 2 of the recent studies. So just a real quick recap. I can't see the chat, but why do we need new HPV vaccines? You can go ahead and type it in the chat if you want to, and I can come back to it later. But besides job security for myself, right? Why do we need to develop new HPV vaccines? And so again, I'll give you a few seconds to think about that and type it in. Okay, so while you're thinking about that, I'll, in the interest of time, I'll continue, right? So again, not all types of HPV that can cause cancer are covered by the current vaccines, right? I mentioned Gardasil 9, it protects against 7 types that cause cancer. There are actually 14 known types. So not all types are covered by the current vaccine. And also, we don't have a treatment. We don't have an antiviral. These vaccines are only prophylactic. So trying to find new ways to develop treatments for individuals who have HPV and are able to clear it. We don't know what the most common types are in the general Native population, right? We've done a few studies, which I'll get to, but not very many across the US. We also don't know if these vaccines are necessarily working. And so again, one of our studies that we did with the Great Plains alludes to the fact that, yes, it possibly is protecting against certain types, but we don't really know. Our assumption is that it's working the same in the general population as it is in Native populations. And what we're seeing now, and this is more hitting closer to home here in Flagstaff, and recently what we're seeing with COVID-19 vaccine is these vaccines require cold storage, right? Those virus-like particles, if they're left to sit on a bench for too long at room temperature, they'll fall apart and they're no longer can be used as a vaccine. And we saw that here at our partnering clinic, where they said that the electricity went off over the weekend. And so the temperature of the refrigerator went up. And so they had to get rid of all of their vaccines. And so that can be a problem. And so that's what we're working on in our lab, is trying to find new ways and new vaccines that don't require this cold storage for extended periods of time. Okay, so getting into the data, and again, this is the paper down shown at the bottom that we published in 2019, working with one of the tribes in the Great Plains. And so, as I mentioned, the US, this data varies depending on what you're looking at. The general US population, 25% are at least of women have HPV exposure. That number is maybe decreased a little bit since I've actually done the most recent literature search. Again, I mentioned we don't know really what the HPV status is in the general population, in the Native population, because we haven't done these studies. And there's only been a few that have looked at HPV prevalence in communities. So there's 2 studies that were done. So in the Hopi here in Arizona, they found a similar prevalence to the general population. This data is a little bit old now. It's 2014 when it was collected. And then also our study that we did with Missouri Breaks in the Great Plains. And we found that at that time, almost 35% of the women were exposed. And we tested against all 14 different types, all these different types shown here. And we can see that the most prevalent type, the most common type in this study is not covered by the vaccines. Those that are covered by the vaccine are shown here with the orange box or the gold box around it. And so again, the most prevalent type is not the most prevalent in the general population. We don't see that as well. And so this was a little concerning for us. But what was more concerning, and I'll get to this, is looking at age and infection, right? And so there's different sociodemographics, lifestyle, biological factors, and really all of these can lead to any STI. The age of the individuals, younger individuals typically have a higher prevalence of STIs than older populations, the age and the number of sexual partners, right? And then also, are these infections able to clear themselves? Are they something you need treatment, antibiotics, et cetera? And so we're going to look at age as a risk factor and compare it to the general population versus our study done with the Great Plains. So in the blue line is the 14 different types of HPV that can cause cancer. And you can see, right, the younger population has a higher prevalence, and then it sort of plateaus around 5% in the older population. And these individuals typically, they're going to have a lifelong HPV, right? That's why it's important to get your well women's exam, because most individuals clear the virus within 2 years, but others cannot. And we don't know exactly why that is happening. And so what we found in the study was that younger individuals, and then remember, we had 700 women in this study, they were nearly twice as much. And there were no major risk factors. The number of sexual partners, the age of the individuals were not serious risk factors. So we don't know why they had such a high prevalence. And then it didn't really plateau among the older population. We saw a decrease, but it was still quite high, around 20%. And that was very concerning. And then when we looked at the 16 and 18, so in the general population, these two types cause most cervical cancers. And we found that it still plateaued among women 30 or older, around 8 to 10%. And that is still pretty high. That's saying that these individuals who are older, for some reason, aren't clearing the virus. But what we did see in the younger population is almost none of them had 16 and 18, and these are covered by the vaccines. So again, it's telling us, oh yeah, maybe the vaccine's helping to protect against the types covered by the vaccines. However, these women that are older that weren't able to be vaccinated at the time, they're not clearing the virus for whatever reason, right? And so that was really what was concerning to us. It wasn't really the prevalence, it was these lifelong infections. And so what does the HPV test do, right? And so really, when you go and get HPV tested, it's looking for a very small part of genetic material related to HPV, right? The human genome, right? We have 3 billion base pairs, or 3 billion different types of DNA, right, pairs found in our genome. HPV is around 8,000 base pairs, so it's significantly smaller. But that test, the HPV test, only looks for 21 to 30, depending on the type, base pair. So it looks for a very, very small amount of genetic material that is specific for HPV. And again, that's where we found that 35% of the women were positive and about 65 were negative. And so what we have asked from the tribe, and we have received tribal approval, is can we do more testing on these individuals that have HPV? So we're taking those same samples and look at the larger genome, right? Can we look at the HPV genome? And we're really only focused on 16, 18, and 51 because those are the ones that were the highest and they're known to cause most cancers. And really, that's where we're at right now. We received tribal approval. We're in the process now of obtaining funding. And so it looks like we might have funding to do these studies. And then from there, really is where it'll drive the next research question. So the answer is yes, if there's mutations that we find in this genetic material from HPV, right, can we design new vaccines? Right. And so that's what my lab is doing. Can we take this information from this genetic material and design new vaccines that will be helpful for these native populations? Is this also a reason why women are staying infected longer, right? Maybe that will help answer that question where I showed that these women over the age of 30 are really staying infected longer. We don't know. And then if the answer is no, maybe we find there isn't any genetic difference in this HPV genome. So the answer is no. So what is causing women from these populations to develop cervical cancer? And that's kind of where we're at right now in the study that we're doing here in Flagstaff. And so again, we're looking at these different questions. So what type of HPV are causing cervical cancer in women? I feel like that's a much larger study that should be done by CDC. That data might already exist. It's not really available right now. Do viral mutations cause Native women to stay infected, right? That's what I just talked about, and how we're trying to obtain funding so we can do those studies to look at the HPV genome. And so right now we have an ongoing project looking at what about women who are HPV positive or negative? Is this increasing their likelihood of developing cervical cancer? And so that's what I'm going to talk about next. And then in the interest of time, I can talk about some of the vaccines we're working on, or we can skip and we can just go to the questions. All right, so our ongoing project at looking at HPV is also not just looking at prevalence of HPV, but the vaginal microbiome, because we know the vaginal microbiome can influence progression, at least in other populations, right? Our partner at University of Arizona, she has looked at the vaginal microbiome in Hispanic women and showed that there's a difference. And do we see a similar difference in Native women? And is this the result of developing cervical cancers? And so we're working with the NACA clinic, which is what you saw in that video here in Flagstaff, Arizona, with 200 Native and non-Native women. That's our current ongoing pilot project. And we're collecting vaginal swabs from those individuals. They're providing a survey very much similar to the one that we did with the Great Plains, with some additional questions. And then we're looking at HPV status, the microbiome, and other different biomarkers. And then really is that a result of them having some more likelihood of developing cervical cancer? So we have applied for additional funding for 2 more years, and that will hopefully be with MedStar, which is one of the Strong Heart Study partners in Phoenix, and they will then recruit 200 additional Native women for this study. So again, right now the aim is to really develop this culturally sensitive protocol. That's really what we've been working on, is how can we collect the samples, make sure it's appropriate, ask questions in these surveys, and then in the future, when we have to discard of the samples, make sure it's in a culturally sensitive way. We have not gone on to aim 2, and that's looking at the HPV genotyping or the biomarkers, et cetera, because we do that when we pool all the samples together. And so we're getting close to that, so I don't have any data to show on there. However, I do have to show, so COVID-19 has affected us, right? We were just about to start recruiting women, and then the pandemic hit and the clinic shut down, and then there's been some turnover in the clinic. And so we've been a little slow at getting things going, but now we have this protocol down, and we have started to recruit women. So I think the number has actually changed. We're probably in the 30s now of women that we've recruited, and most of them are Native. So the NACA clinic serves both Native and non-Native women. The average age is fairly young. So you can see it's around 30 is the average. This is Elisa. She works down at U of A, and she's at the NACA clinic providing some training on the sample collection. This is my former student, Kristen. She developed some of these information brochures or flyers on HPV. She also helped with designing the flyer, which is actually currently right now being used. There's an event that's happening, and which I'm going to right after this. And then also you saw in the video, Skylar and Kaylin, who are both my students, and Skylar was actually working a lot on this project after the Kristen graduated. All right, so again, I want to be respectful of time. I have more that I can talk about the current vaccines, or I can just stop there and leave it for questions. I don't know, Ryan, what time or whatever, what you would like me to do.
We have about 15 minutes left. There were some questions that came up in the chat as you were introducing your questions and your research. So let me get some of those addressed, and then we may have time for you, or perhaps the viewers would like to just voice what they'd like to hear more about too in the chat. So yeah, we had a lot of feedback when you were asking the question about why do we need HPV vaccines? So many people voiced their ideas there. So thank you for everyone for participating there. Let's see. One question that came up along the way was, how does one get rid of genital warts, and do the warts eventually cause cancer?
Okay. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the warts themselves, when you can treat those, right? You can go to a healthcare provider and those can be removed by different types of methods. It depends on the location and the extent of the warts. And so they can remove the wart themselves, but they're not actually treating the virus, right? And so if you are still infected after they have removed the wart, you may or may not develop genital warts again. It depends, right? However, the types that cause genital warts are not the types that cause cancer, right? So you cannot go on and develop cancer from that same type. But what they have found, and this is a little misleading, is that sometimes individuals who have warts they can have open lesions, right? And that makes them more susceptible to be infected by the types that can cause cancer, right? So a lot of times they'll see in the warts themselves, they'll find the HPV type that causes warts, and then also the type that can cause cancer. So again, the warts themselves don't cause cancer, but it can make the individual more susceptible to infection and of the types that can cause cancer.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, let's see. So our options are to either go into more detail about new vaccines, or that's question 4, right? Or question 5 about increasing trial participation. Did I understand that correctly, Dr. Lee?
Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing more 5. So let's talk a little bit, Dr. Lee, about how we can increase trial participation and uptake, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the next slide and then I might have to skip forward to some slides.
Perfect. So, okay.
And also in that video, Skylar is from Rosebud. So
oh, wow.
Shout out again to South Dakota. And he has done some wonderful things, and he's staying here at NAU. He's finishing his master's of public health and working on some other projects. He's moved on from my lab, but he's done some great things. But okay, so how can we increase trial participation? So when we're developing vaccines in our lab, we really take this community to bench methodology or approach, right? Can we take information from the community and bring it back to the bench and design vaccines that are relevant for Native populations, right? So again, our goal of the lab is really to develop vaccines that will target Native populations, but maybe also help the general population. And so we are looking at vaccines against gonorrhea, cervical cancer / HPV, cardiovascular disease, and also the opioid epidemic. Those are just some examples. And again, those affect all of our communities at different lengths, right? So what we have learned is that we can have a good vaccine from the pandemic, right? We can have a good vaccine, but that doesn't mean uptake, right? And we've seen that across the US, unfortunately, but fortunately among Native populations, we're seeing that they have actually been more responsive and have a higher vaccine uptake than others. And so again, a lot of people ask, how is a biochemist, somebody who works in the lab, being involved with these more community health type of projects? And really it comes back to that Lakota prayer of what I do and what I feel as an individual, as a Native person, is I need to apply my knowledge of chemistry and biochemistry and viruses and vaccines to help my population. And so again, that also goes to another quote where research is supposed to be culturally neutral, but someone's culture is always influencing research. And so, I'm sorry, my cat has jumped up on my table. And so again, that as a Native person, I feel like I have to use my expertise and make sure that Native populations are brought to the table. And in fact, I remember presenting to community members, and I had one elder come up to me and she said, stop researching us and start helping us. And so that really drove everything home. And so what we have learned, right, and thinking about vaccines is I can make the best vaccine available out there that will help Native populations, but that doesn't mean that they're going to take it. So we have to work together to start to build that trust, not only through the researchers, the academic individuals like myself, but some of these more government agencies that will provide the vaccines in the future. And really that work has been done in collaboration with the CO, so the Community Engagement Alliance. That's what we've been working on in the last year, and how we can talk about these vaccines, bring it to community members through stakeholders, through champions, et cetera, and making sure that they're educated appropriately on the information, because they're not always getting that information from us through academic researchers. And we know there's a lot of mistrust among the federal or state governments as well. And so again, these are not in any particular order, but what we see is that healthcare providers and doctors are really one of the main individuals that our community members go to for information about vaccines and clinical trials. It could be other religious or faith leaders. Community and family members are also very important in disseminating information. And so how do we make sure that these individuals have the correct and right information? And that's really the gap that academic researchers were trying to fill when it comes to this information coming down from the government, right? Whether it's state or tribal government or federal government. And some of that has been through work that Missouri Breaks has done, right? So these are just some examples of flyers that we've made. So again, the NACP has on our website, we have information about clinical trials and breaking it down for individuals. We also, through COVID-19, we have developed culturally relevant flyers. And so again, this is just an example. This is, you can see an older one, and talking about the vaccines and working with the community partners in the clinics and trying to develop these educational materials. So again, really that comes down to going back to clinical trials and getting individuals. Is I think it comes down to education, right? Making sure that they're educated, making sure that we're educating them at their level, and building that trust back between researchers and also the governments as well that are involved with these clinical trials and vaccines in the future. So with that, though, I mean, I can open up the floor for additional questions. This is just my acknowledgement slide to everybody at NAU. Crystal is really working on the new vaccines in my lab, which I didn't present on. Here are many of my lab members. We're very female strong in our lab, and we partner with the University of New Mexico. So with that, I would like to say Nyawe, or thank you in my language.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you. What fantastic research you've been involved with. Thank you for sharing, Dr. Lee, today. We had one more question come up. Why can't men be vaccinated against HPV?
So men can be vaccinated against HPV, and that's the newer recommendation has increased that age range for both males and females. Now, men cannot be tested for HPV, so that's the difference. So they have a FDA approved testing. So when we go and get our pap smears or HPV testing, women can get tested, and that's through a vaginal swab. They do not have that available for men right now. They in the research setting, they do have some HPV testing that can be done, but it has not been FDA approved at this point.
Okay, any more questions? Just, you can unmute yourself. That would be totally fine. Or you can add in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat. We've got some thank yous coming through. Oh, one more question came up. What age should men or boys be vaccinated?
Right, so the current vaccine is approved for ages 9 and older for both males and females, but typically parents or guardians take them in around 11 or 12. So like that was the age that we vaccinated my daughter at. And so again, 11 or 12, again, this is a prophylactic vaccine. It's to help to protect them prior to potential exposure in the future. So again, 11, 12, I would recommend for vaccination. But again, it's
Great.
from age 9 to 26, and after 26 to 45, they can speak with their healthcare provider.
Okay, great advice. Okay, a few more questions if you don't mind. What's the cause of vaginal differences in the various ethnicities? Is there genetic or lifestyle differences or due to environmental exposures, perhaps?
Right, so that's talking about the vaginal microbiome, and it's all of the above, really, right? So there could be changes in diet. We saw difference in Hispanic versus non-Hispanic, and exactly what is causing that, we don't specifically know for every individual, but again, lifestyle, environmental exposures, smoking is a main indicator as well, smoking habits, whether they're using commercial tobacco or not. And so those are some of the questions we are asking in our current study about current lifestyle. So as we move forward with this project, can we assess what specifically is it? Is it genetic factors? Is it environmental? Or is it all of the above? We don't really know at this point.